Okay, I think we're running. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 6th of July, 2026, in our frisky ongoing year of deteriorating doom and gloom. And of course, Evolution Slam Dunk and all of our little works will be linked, as well as the tortucanwordpress.com, available freebie for everybody that wants to share information on such sundry tasks. Now we're just waiting for our image to come back up on my little preview screens. Sorry, starting a tad late today. It was a busy weekend. Fun stuff going down to our local Spokane fireworks display, which had beautiful weather and a nice show and very nice little splatty stuff. Got to see all the folk down in there. Hello, Lisa. Got to see the crowds, which, by the way, our fireworks display had bigger crowds than was at the Trump pseudo state fair in Washington, D.C., although bearing in mind that the temperature of Spokane was much better case. Okay, why is my screen suddenly turned all screwball? And I am not seeing things. What the hell is going on here? Whoop, whoop. Come, where am I? Whoop. Yes, my screen is suddenly, my image here is all just, there you go. Okay. So I suddenly had my display and I was seeing absolutely nothing instead of my little mug and all the other little fun and games. So I didn't want to arbitrarily touch something on the screen lest I accidentally hit a button without realizing it, but it seemed to have corrected itself. Anyway, as you well know, update is another stupid little memory thing. Come on, getting rid of you. Whoop, whoop. Our exciting world of Dwayne Gish, his cute little books, done in 1978, and then he revised it in 1995. Evolution, the fossils still say no, which were back in the day a fantastically massive resource that people would have been drawing on in the creationist community, but which today, wish he'd go already. Yes, well, we're going to have some fun times in here. Can't even impeach the little effort because that just gets you President Vance and little puppet Master Teal behind the scenes. So we're sort of stuck in the brigade until we can get the House reconfigured that can start pulling the financial plug on them, and then get enough state houses and that reconfigured onto a progressive scheme so that we can get some amendments through and do a lot of fun, exciting stuff. But we'll have to go through an awful lot of crap to get to the better times. But anyway, beyond all of that, Gish is now doing a chapter on geology evidence. And curiously enough, well, he had a little geology chart where the 1978 version and the 1995 version shows a little bit of adjustment because in betwixt those two periods, the dating of the Cambrian had been pulled back from about 600 million years ago to about 530 as they had better datings. Our Rocks Were There, Volume 2 and Volume 1 has a detailed breakdown of the current standard chronological frames. Some stupid little memo coming up there. Get rid of that. There we go. Anyway, that was a little minor fluff. Then, interestingly, the 1995 book decided to add enable. I do not want to deal with that. I'm getting little stupid memos from Yahoo and others wanting to tinker with things, and I do not want to have to bother about that later. Come on, shut down. There we go. I do not have PDF open. Why do I need to see that? Sheesh. Very annoying. Little PDF warning was coming up. I don't have any PDFs open. So it's just some little wacky little updates going on in these things. Well, such is life. Hello, Brian. Yes. Again, starting a little bit late this day than usual, but there we go. So Gish decides to weigh in 1995 with a section. He already had it in the 78 book, but he's going after The Day, Age, and Gap Theories of Biblical Geology. And this time around, in the 95 book, he's citing Henry Morris's 1984 book to act as theological import to rule out on theological grounds either of those models. That book, fortunately, is available at archive.org. So I'll be putting a link up to it so that you can borrow it and view it if you feel masochistic enough to want to plow through the thing. It's all fairly straightforward Henry Morris. YEC ideology in this period is not excessively innovative. A book that you read from Henry Morris in 1985 or 1975 or 1995 has pretty much consistent superstructure to it with a few minor exceptions. Much the same is for the Gish world. Often a lot of these doctrines then undergo big changes when we get down to the 21st century, where a new generation of creationists at ICR, AIG, CMI, and then the new creationists and others are tweaking around with the facts. But anyway, we digress. Then he resumes his older text, and it has some funky little things. Alas, I can't help in the way of primary sources linkages on them, but I'll describe what the heck is going on in here. He mentions, ironically, Robert Broom, apropos there being 800 billion vertebrate Karoo formation of South Africa. Well, gosh, Broom is fun and games because he's the guy who's pivotal in predicting the double-jawed therapsids that are part of them, which I can guarantee you he's not bringing up in the 95 book because I'd already analyzed that in the old tip work. We'll be getting to that in due course. Anyway, this article that this Broom bit is drawn from was from 1959 by Norman Newell, big paleontologist, lived 1909 to 2005, and it's on the adequacy of the fossil record. What the text said, actually, was skeletons, not animals, and also that, quote, such estimates, of course, are not highly accurate, unquote. So Gish is starting off cherry picking and evasive as that. For fun, I'll be putting a link to a 1998 book on the fossil record, an anthology of technical papers and that's available at archive.org. It can put you into perspective as to kind of where the field was around the time that Gish was playing around. Almost any subsection is enough to debunk him. Oh, yeah. The geology is not creationists' friends. And the fact that creationists insist that's the case. You've got Tim Clary, in particular, Michael Ord. That crowd is a relatively small bunch who play around oscillating between stuff that you see at ICR and AIG and the like, and also the crowd that gets together periodically at these international creationism conferences, where a small cluster, if I'm trying to think of typically the geology paper, Whitmore and others fall into that category. You maybe have less than a dozen people, more than the ones who typically are doing stuff on cosmology. And technically speaking, very few actually trained in paleontology. You do have a few that are trained in it, like Kurt Wise and that newer little guy that's suddenly names escape me, and McLean is another one. So you have a few people who technically have paleontology training, although it doesn't really show all that much in their work. Anyhow, so Gish is starting off doing some fast and loose deck stacking, but I really love the one that I came to next. Again, alas, I'm not able to get the primary source on the paper for you, but I've been able to find by other means the full text, so I will describe what the context of it is. Gish wrote, quote, "The herring fossil bed in the Miocene shales of California, containing evidence that 1 billion fish died within a 4 square mile area," unquote. Ooh, clearly implying that something catastrophic must have happened. This was to another 1959 paper by Harry Ladd, and it was citing a 1920 paper, of all things. So this is not exactly recent material. And the point is that Ladd was directly relating this particular example, and quite a few others on the next pages, to the toxic effects of red tide and the like that were just coming onto the scene in the 1950s. And so Ladd was saying specifically, quote, catastrophic death in the sea on a comparable scale occurs today, unquote. So he was not implying that nobody knew what the mechanism of this was. Quite to the contrary, it was not merely a mechanism, it was one that you could see today. Now, the fish involved are herrings that are about 6 to 8 inches long. And I did a calculation that if you have 4 square miles, that's 446 million square feet, which means we're talking about roughly 2 to 3 fish per square foot, which is considerable, unbelievable. And relative, it's interesting that for context, I decided to check Wikipedia on what kind of size bacterial blooms can be. And one in 2019 of cyanobacteria covered 1,300 square miles, way bigger than 4. So the idea that now and then you could get a bacterial bloom that was sufficiently toxic to kill 4 square miles worth of fish, yeah, not a problem. Not really. Do you really think they believe all that crap? I will say that by and large, everybody who publishes this creationist material believes everything they say. I don't agree with people who argue that they are consciously lying and grifting, although there is obviously an element of self-aggrandizement. Once you get into the biz, Ken Ham pulls down like 150 grand, maybe more nowadays, a year. Likewise, Steve Meyer over at the Discovery Institute and therefore they have a big monetary incentive to keep the thing going. But I don't have any reason to doubt that they fully believe all the claptrap they say. They're absolutely convinced of it. And when you look at their material from a source methods direction, their addiction to secondary sources, their inability to fairly represent source material, just as we've just seen with Dwayne Gish, that deck stacking apologetics going on, it's frustrating and annoying and makes you want to jump to the idea that they are consciously misrepresenting the sources with a V. But no, it's deck stacking the material so that it continues to look good. And you find exactly the same format of stuff in religious apologetics. Like to suffer from oxygen deprivation, overheated, rotting algae, the damage killed millions. We're finding on a silly small scale the idiot Trump administration having the damned reflecting pool painted blue, and which means it's heating it up, which means it's a more desirable environment for algae, which is why there's big algae blooms and the thing turned green. Who would ever think that Donald Trump, a scientific illiterate, and the people he hires who are scientific illiterates would not think this through very well? Oh, well, don't blame me. I voted for Harris. So we've got the fact that the physical dimensions of the fish and the amount of fish operations aren't really helping all of that. Lake and well, there is a lake, that volcanic lake that burps carbon monoxide every once in a while and can kill off inhabitants living around it. You get all those sorts of things. The algae bloom circumstance and others, and any anoxic lake can happen. The Black Sea is largely anoxic at the bottom, which is why it preserves things as well as it does. That it all involves the circulation level of how thermals come in and salinity values and whether currents can flip in and out or not efficiently. We'll have to, I think Maddie is one of Dapper Dino's friends. She knows a lot about the climate oceanography angle of stuff. That's we'll punt it over to their side. Anyway, these two papers that Gish was putting up have now brought his source citations for technical papers up to a whopping 6, which is about 12% of his references. So it's going to be kind of funky to see how much of the stuff is punting to anti-evolution resources or general works, secondary sources. I'm remembering from the superficiality of his analysis of dinosaurs, which we'll be getting to eventually, that there was almost no technical citations for it. But we will be able to bump into an awful lot of the stuff on the little protoceratopsids that are relevant to ceratopsids, because I was gipping off of that for our old Troubles in Paradise book. and the three macroevolutionary episode stuff and all that. So that's not new. But coming at all of this stuff from decades later gives me a fresh perspective, because we have way more technical literature available. So there may be some little sidebar material that will be able to supply background stuff on a lot of these little peripheral details. Now, what was interesting about this Miocene shale example is I can't find a damn thing on it since then. There may be some obscure technical papers on mass kills of herring, but I couldn't find anything by coming at it from a variety of directions, either the deposit that it's in or the issues of cyanobacterial and red tide mortalities among herring in that. So whatever element this was from this 1920 example, it's sufficiently niche that it hasn't been dealt with, as far as I can tell, in more recent technical literature over the last, 60 some odd years? So if anybody is aware of anything from this Miocene shale example, in fact, when I tried Googling about shales and herring, there's a performer whose last name, I guess, is Herring, and his first name. So it was popping up all this material about this performer and nothing whatsoever on geology. So yeah, go figure. Anyway, part two of our little show is a thing that popped up courtesy of the Discovery Institute, scienceandculture.com, which I think is intriguing that now so much of their stuff is in this separate website rather than the old Discovery Institute stuff. It's a thing on occasion by the new Steven Spielberg film, Luskin and Company. It's by David Klinghoffer, but it's riffing off of Casey Luskin. Alien life would challenge evolution, not religion. And that really piqued my curiosity because I'm going, what? Well, it's kind of a convoluted argument. Largely, it's a complaint about UFOs and Spielberg's implications, that there would be important theological implications from the new Disclosure Day movie, and there may very well be that because Spielberg is something of a UFO groupie. He's got a soft spot for it, going all the way back to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But the intelligent design position on this is simply a section of origins or bust reasoning, because they're arguing that because life could only originate by an intelligent designer, that therefore the presence of alien life elsewhere would be merely more examples of intelligently designed life elsewhere in the universe. Now, this is kind of a chuckle because, of course, if you move over to the Young Earth Creationist camp, a big doctrine going way back is that life in general in anywhere else in the universe, or intelligent life in particular, is theologically impossible. That only here on Earth has life been made, and that everything else is impossible in principle. And it'd be fun to see Casey Luskin and Klinghoffer take a stab at Answers in Genesis crowd to try to deal with this sort of a thing, but don't anticipate that happening. News of it didn't know the cause. It looks like the combo of heat and the hydro spray, much like a high level of oxygen deep. It's killed the lake. Yeah, there's some. I would agree that for me, since I believe in a naturalistic origin for life, it's presumably the case that if you have a planet that has liquid water oceans, and particularly if it has free oxygen in its atmosphere, bingo bongo, you have a planet with life on it. Whether or not, because that free oxygen is being generated by living systems, assuming, of course, life is in the DNA mode, and carbohydrates and ATPs and all that kind of stuff that we know of in our living biosystems. Whether or not that's the only form of life that's possible, I'm skeptical that you can have different biology involved, but it's not impossible. Let's take a look at Europa and find out a few other little sidebars to think whether or not something may be going on. There could even be a peptide DNA or peptide NA version PNAs operating in the clouds of Venus. It's not intrinsically impossible. There's some studies and analyses that kind of go in that direction. Need to send probes, need to look more detailed. Certainly, probing the Venus atmosphere is way easier than probing the Venus surface, because anything you send down there gets roasted to a crisp very shortly and doesn't do a hell of a lot. And if any life ever did exist on the surface of Venus, it's probably virtually certain to be long gone now. But anyway, so you've got, if naturalistic origin of life originates, the question is, how common is it? Well, most planets are gas giants in the universe, or they are either too big, super Earths, or they're orbiting too close or too far. So in the spread, even though planets are dime a dozen in solar systems that we now know, the odds that you're in that little Goldilocks zone, which can vary. If you're close enough to a dimmer star, it's not the same distance as if you're dealing with something from a brighter G-type star like ours. I'm very wary of the likelihood that life that can build spaceships and send probes is very common. Our own life history goes on to how, was there something inevitable that was going to lead to the equivalent of vertebrates, and eventually things with smart brains, and eventually things that do integral calculus? Is there an automatic element that if life is percolating along for 4 or 5 billion years, this will certainly happen? Maybe. But at the same time, it wouldn't at all surprise me that it's extremely rare. And so if you're saying 100 billion to 1 of finding a planet that also has the characteristics that we had for life to originate, that could mean that on average, each galaxy has maybe one planet with intelligent life on it, which means for our galaxy, we're it. And therefore, you could travel stars after stars after stars, and even to another galaxy, and you would have a devil of a time to find somebody that is at our same level to chat with. But that wouldn't mean that there isn't a lot of that in the universe, because the universe is gobsmackingly big. So you have hundreds of billions of galaxies. Under this scenario of one intelligent life form per galaxy, you have hundreds of billions of intelligent life forms in the universe, but we're effectively quarantined from each other. So I'm not anticipating any space travel going on. Now, from the point of view of an evolutionary perspective, wow, you want to know, is all life everywhere based on DNA? Can you have PNA-based organisms? Can you have silicon-based organisms? Can such a thing even exist at all? We don't know. We haven't got out enough to see. And certainly nothing of that form has been generated artificially in labs yet. So we'll have to see. Some Christians still use the "if we were 1 centimeter." Oh, yes. Not only do we find, they don't necessarily get that literal about this, but they certainly use it. And not only just the young Earth creationists use that, that this is the thing that pops up in a lot of the intelligent design and old Earth creationist literature. That whole privileged planet, we are fine-tuned and everything is all providentially marvelous. Well, in terms of the distance from the sun, for example, since our thing varies by millions of miles from one period on our orbit to another, haven't they looked? And even though it's been a stable orbit all of this time, nonetheless, it's varied. Plus the fact that the sun was cooler back, say, 1 billion years ago. The ingredients of life are common enough. Carbon, water, mixed with other life in the heat zone is inevitable. I'm inclined to agree with you. As I said, if you've got the planetary systems, and it's another reason for looking at Mars very closely. We've done a little bit by remote control, but you really need to get pesky geologists who can just run amok on Mars to be able to see whether life may have originated there at one time and fizzled out, or less likely, it's hunkered down in living little niche things. I have a certain soft spot for the Gaia hypothesis, which is functionally, if life takes hold, it terraforms the place. It converts the planet to a biofilm superstructure that's comparatively resilient. Remember that even though complex things vertebrates and the like are very prone to extinction events, and individual species go out of fashion, every 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 million years. A lot of groups are remarkably resilient to mass extinctions. Insects are just really effective. And so if anything cataclysmic happens, I'm rooting for the cockroaches. Plus bacteria, although it is not impossible, as I may have mentioned on previous episodes, that some bacterial lineages in the billions of years between the origin of life and the present may have gone extinct, including very possibly the exact group from which, and that was like 2.5 billion years ago. So you could easily have a bacterial lineage that had a long, long, long run, way longer than trilobites, and yet eventually just fizzled out for reasons that we would have to think through. Possible. Maybe they fizzled out during the big snowball Earth phase. There's all sorts of things where just the right luck of the draw and kaboom, you're gone. Or some bit where they're devoured or killed off by rival bacterial systems that developed. A lot of stuff is going on. A lot of genetic systems are happening, and it's in that range where you're getting a lot of lateral gene transfer and all sorts of complex mixtures that are setting the genetic stages in these various lineages for what eventually is going to become multicellular life that also may have had several different abortive attempts. There's one going back like a couple billion years that seems to have fizzled out, and then there's the Ediacara biota. By that time, you're starting probably having most of the animal phyla in early protoforms that we find dominating in the Cambrian, probably already kicking around in the Ediacara world, but all so microscopic and soft-bodied, they're functionally invisible because we just don't have Lagerstätten from that period. So roaches will survive nuclear Armageddon, yes, indeed. As well as, but I do not want the roaches that are currently serving in the Trump administration in their cabinet to survive at all. Their shelf life should be singularly curtailed. At any rate, and time will deal with that as well. Spray of laundry soap and bleach will kill them outright. Well, that shows you about if nature only had developed laundry soap and bleach, that would alter a lot of the dynamics of the thing. Insects are remarkably vast. Another fascinating little factoid is if you develop the ability to fly, boy, does that improve your speciation tendencies. And it's no coincidence that most animals fly. The moment you think about the fact that most of the mammals are flyers, bats, that birds with their 9,000-10,000 species, and the one lineage of the dinosaurs that managed to survive, and of course those vast majority of beetles and their cousins that have wings and can fly. So in that functional sense, most animals fly. In terms of body mass, us and ants are about the same. They're little tiny little critters, but yet in terms of overall ecosystem impact, even though we are a big infestation among the vertebrates and are very numerous, 8 billion of us, in terms of body mass, the ants are holding their own, thank you very much. So it's an interesting little dynamic to see what's going on. I think there's like 25,000 species of ants. That's a lot. No coincidence that creationists are not terribly keen to try to do baraminology on any of the ants or bees, wasps, any of that crowd, beetles, let alone as well. Invertebrates, there's a colossal number of toad species and all that kind of stuff. It'd be fun to see them try to go their way through these things, but don't hold your breath on that one. So anyway, let me see where we are on timing. We're about half hour through. Let me go ahead and see if I can wiggle up my thank you note for our people who have stuck with us in the patron world here. Playing with my little, there we go. And hopefully this will be sharing our patrons, assistant researchers, friends, and legacy patrons over the years. We fully recognize how things can get dicey and circumstances can go up and down, but the crowd of Surus and Ian Chen from way over in Australia, and Pelagia and so many others, and Slava. Haven't heard from him in quite a long time. He lives in that war-torn Ukraine world, so I'm not sure what the circumstances are going on there. Hopefully we will eventually hear when things have settled down and people can start dealing with things again. So there we go. Anyway, therein lies the circumstance of things. And of course, when you're looking at all that systematics, the moment you go over into old earth creationism and intelligent design, there is zero goose egg attempts at systematics because they don't have the flood and the creation week to dominate their thinking. So that's all of which is a useful measure of the unutility of stuff. I was just working on today the section in our chapter on Noah's Lost Worlds that relates a lot to paleogeography, to the dynamics of what's going on with the inland seaway and polar dinosaurs and all these other things, that it would be hilarious to try to see any creationists work out these supposed biozones that their model is demanding that there be for all of that period. Good luck. But the most they can do is just riff off of already existing material, and they can't even decide which paleo world to go with, supercontinent. So if you're looking at the kind of stuff you would be more likely to get at ICR, they're going with Pangea as the pre-flood world, just riffing off of the paleontology and the geology parasitically. Whereas you move over to the Ark Encounter and Creation Museum at AIG, they're going all the way back to Rodinia, and they're thinking that somehow in the course of the flood burbling on and the big slosh, that Pangea is emerging from that, which involves an awful lot of geological relationship. Even, Tim Clary is going, no, this is too much happening all at once. So that gives you a lot of maneuver on there. In any time when you're dealing with creationists, you have to pay attention to how many of them are riffing off of a very narrow apologetic frame, because it's easy on their conscience, because they can be looking at a particular party line from Answers in Genesis or CMI or ICR or whatever. And if they're particularly not prone to reading older material or burrowing through those pesky little footnotes, they can easily miss the degree to which creationists are at each other's throats on an awful lot of issues, of which, frankly, ICR has been turning into the big boat rocker in pushing both Randy Guliuz's rejection of natural selection and all of his pre-programmed mutations crap, which Dapper Dino and various other people have dove into as just claptrap. And Tim Clary at ICR is also pushing that Cenozoic boundary where the flood expands past the Cretaceous mass extinction, maybe all the way down to the Pleistocene. But the more they do that, the less time they have for other things. But it does mean that they're effectively lumping virtually all the fossil record into the big slosh. And there's a certain wacky logic to that. But there's the moment you start diving into the details, we mentioned the Green River deposit in the first book. That just doesn't fit that model. Ever heard of? I haven't even heard of Valbara. Yes, tell us about that, Lisa. Yes, that name does not ring a bell. I may have it buried in somewhere, but is that a supercontinent or a organism or what? Please give us clarity here. Valbara. Yeah, and it doesn't ring a bell in the supercontinent category. It may indeed be an organism of some sort. I'd have my master bibliography open, otherwise I'd be plugging through and see whether or not the term comes up. I suppose I can get that open. Let me just maybe I do have that open. Let me see. Nope. It's a big file. Oh, the first supercontinent. Yeah, I have not heard of that one. Prior to Columbia, the farther back you go, the more unclear just exactly how big things were. I've heard roughly that supercontinents cycle on about 600 million years. Okay, I got my master bibliography going. Oops. And let's see what we got going here. Yeah, I will have to look that little puppy up, because we do not have that in our reference bibliography as a name that pops up on anything. So la di da. And that's, yeah, as far as when you get back too far, first of all, so much rocks have been subducted. The vast majority of the oceans, for example, is only like 200 million years old or less. And so what you're looking at are little fragments of things. So my understanding was that Rodinia is fairly well characterized and covers a lot of turf, because there's examples of it popping up on all the material. It's more speculative. There's Columbia and also Nuna as kind of continental blocks and how those fit together. In fact, Peter, my friend, who's helping me with the Politique game and the 3D printing and all that, and he's doing a 3D printed telescope project that folds up so you can take it on planes and all that. 10-inch telescope. It's a neat thing. Yeah, he's been working on this for many, many years. But I've talked him into the idea, and he loves it too, of us making a paleo world globe set that would show the continental distributions going back billions of years, all related as physical globes rather than just pictures on a flat map, which is what I've seen elsewhere. I don't know of anybody that's done this as a globe arrangement for people to look at. Then these would show plate boundaries. They would show the existence of the land masses in terms of current continental material, bearing in mind that stuff like the Pacific Northwest, 300 million years ago, where I am in Spokane, would be beachfront property facing northward. All of what is most of Washington state didn't exist yet. So you have to bear in mind how a lot of the real estate has come up since then. But I will definitely have to look that little puppy up, because at the very least, we can have just a prototypical issue of, because we do bring up Nunya and all of that in there. So we want to have, okay, Valvaria. And so theoretically on these little paleo world globes we'd be doing that, when you go way back in time, at least to the Columbia era, there would be segments of the planet that will be just gray, because we don't know what the hell was going on in there. How much land, how much ocean. There's probably a reasonable limit to what some of the big subduction events can be identified, because they now found ways to detect the little squiggle that occurs in a subduction thing that gets clipped off that can trace back hundreds of millions of years. So the little blob that's underneath New York City was originally a subduction event that was 300 million years ago out in the Pacific Ocean. And that's all gotten blah, 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 blah. And there's another area where they've been mapping around New Zealand like that, and they'll be presumably doing these deep mantle tomography stuff from all over the planet that'll piece a lot of stuff together. But because of the difficulties of subduction, it won't surprise me that some areas will remain little terra incognito question marks permanently, because the information just becomes highly fragmentary. The fun part is, at least, that within the last 500 million years, you got an awful lot of stuff to play around with. And the details to which paleo worlds and the construction of the plate movements and all of that stuff can be traced in remarkable detail has literally no counterpart in young Earth creationism. That they're supposedly incorporating all of this data. We deal with the same data. No, they don't. And so I'm not looking forward to any of that stuff. Yeah, it's I'll be just intrigued to see whether or not it may in fact be alluded to in some of the papers in my reference bibliography. It's just not popping up in the titles of anything. So if it's got a Wikipedia page, that'll be something or other. But if supercontinent cycles are roughly on the form of about every 600 years, a million years or so, there's a lot of room in a 4 billion year history for supercontinents to have cycled. Now, one thing would have been the case is that for all practical purposes, there's nothing alive up on them. And it isn't until you're starting to get down into the Pangea world that you actually have surface things, because that's happening after the Cambrian. I would be suspecting that bacteria are colonizing the surface, especially once you get ozone to the point of where the UV radiation is dropping down to the point where things are becoming more congenial. But things that are bigger than a microscope can see are restricted functionally to the oceans until the late Ordovician, early Devonian, something of that type. And so you get bacteria going ashore, you get plants, insects, and eventually Tiktaalik and all that kind of crowd are starting to do that in the Devonian quite a ways down the road. That one abortive experiment in multicellularity, which incidentally is occurring in the same zone and time frame as that Oklo artificial or natural nuclear reactor that was happening a couple billion years ago. It was producing plutonium and diminishing the uranium things. They first thought there was some sort of proliferation problem, that people were stealing from this uranium mine, but no, it was actually a natural nuclear reactor. That was taking place at the same time as these abortive multicellular things that don't seem to leave any descendants. And it's also occurring when there was a big magma plume volcanic activity that was going on as well. So anyway, we're alluding to that in the new book. I think prions could have been the first life form. A possibility. They're a curious little protein component that kind of take on a life of their own. It is argued that peptide materials that linking up, that are linking up with RNA, and that overall the suspicion is in a lot of origin of life researchers that DNA is kind of like a parasite that finagled its way into these replicating systems that involve peptide and small protein elements. So I won't say that prions would have been the earliest life forms, but prion-like components wouldn't surprise me as foam on the beer activity that's going on, just as it's unclear just how many of some of the little viruses that exist, they can be spun off by biology once it gets going. But the question is, are a few of them actually hangers on from the very earliest stages before Luca? Not sure. Not enough information. 2 pieces of craton. Kapval craton and the Pilbara. I've heard of Pilbara. Not considered as enough evidence for a supercontinent, just past structural. Yeah, because there would certainly be, just like in our Pacific Northwest up here, as Nick Zentner has commented on, you've got things like the Silesia massive, that was big volcanic thing that was probably all underwater. It probably never actually reached the surface, and that's a couple 100 million years ago, that becomes fragmented and disintegrating it as you slam into the North American plate, and little bits and pieces of it get mangled, and some of it gets subduction, but other parts end up clunked in the Cascades, and I think little bits and pieces of it up in British Columbia and that too. So things become terribly exciting. The idea that you could have plates that have disappeared, and so when they're trying to work retroactively, the Farallon plate, and how much of the Farallon plate actually may have involved another separate plate that's become completely subducted or partially so. And so the geology and stuff is really exciting and ongoing, and of course gets in little geological fistfights with people like Baja, BC, which is still not considered a dominant mainstream viewpoint, although Nick Zentner likes to interview the people that are for it. And there's some brand new papers that we're citing that are detailing some of the little wrinkles as to how a lot of these things can be resolved in terms of what the data field are. So it's an ongoing and exciting area, but is such a completely disconnect from the creationist geology, where they've had decades to work on this stuff. Andrew Snelling is a geologist that he could have worked this stuff out, or in these other people have geological training, that they could work out what this supposed plate structure was in the pre-flood world, and then calculate and see what is doing what when and what critters are preserved where and why. The problem is they're never going to make it all fit, because to have it that fast, you're squishing things together, you're generating heat too fast. There's stuff that where you couldn't be able to form certain kinds of crystals in rock formations because they take too long to do. Even forming limestone involves 10,000 years or so just to squeeze the water out of it, as one of the non-creationists published in Creation Research Society quarterly. Bless their little heart. At least they put that in. You don't get many discouraging words like that at the Answers Research Journal. And then, of course, these issues don't pop up at all in that on life support moribund biocomplexity journal over at Intelligent Design Land. And the old Earth creationists don't have any journals functionally at all. So anyway, there we got our little stuff. Yes, indeed, the Pilbara. Oh, let me look up Pilbara. Let's see about that. That may come out. I close my thing off again. Yeah, it's such an intriguing area, geology and paleo worlds, that were very difficult to tinker with in the last century, but are just hot stuff today. Okay, whoops, wrong. Problems tinkering with two computers at the same time and two separate mice, one of which is the is the one, whoops, come on. Okay, Pilbara. And let's see what's coming up. Ooh, I got 6 things in there, yes. There's a 3.4 billion year old stromatolite reef from the Pilbara Craton. So that's putting that in that ballpark. That's quite old. That's the early frames. That's a 2007 paper. 2021 one about Archean mantle, systematics in basalts and chromatites. So that's another one. The time frame. 2012 paper, geologic history of the Pilbara region of Western Australia, 3.5 to 1.8 GA. So that puts another little ballpark as to when this thing might be going on. Yes, when you ignore evidence, it is easier to believe what you want. Yes. Well, remember the things that I like to point out, and I like that Dapper Dino repeats this thing, because part of the reason why the TIP project I think is useful is that source by source, I'm measuring literally how much of the scientific literature gets referenced by creationists, intelligent designers, and young Earth creationists. And so I can declare by measurement that they're functionally missing 90% of the relevant data. Not an opinion, observation. And then we got, let's see, 2013 paper, some more stuff on microbial structures from the Dresser Formation in the Pilbara. Then we got redox of the Archean atmosphere, 3250 to 2750 million years ago in sandstones from there. That's an older 1999 paper. And then we got some fossil jellyfish. This is from a creationist journal. Yes, yeah, the Journal of Creation, complaining about the fossil jellyfish from Pilbara. It's from a Philip Wartz, who looks like that's probably about the only thing he ever did. There are occasional stray figures who do a paper or two and then disappear, sometimes quite a long time ago. They might have not have disappeared from the scene. There's ones, that were doing things like 1995, and they're still lecturing, and they're even on the lecture circuit amongst churches, but they're not writing anything down. And it's much easier to repeat the mantras if you don't have it written down with footnotes. And if there's no footnotes, then there's nothing for the faithful to be fact checking. They're just seeing the little PowerPoint slides up at the church and dealing with it from that point. So anyway, there we go. Let me put, we've managed to go to 48 minutes. So we're nearing our full show. Let's put up our advert for The Old Rocks Were There, Volume 1. We can assume that Peter de Tucker from Europe will be coming up with a advert volume once we get that out. Okay, let's put that on there and back that up to the start, like so. And let's get you over there. Boom, 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 boom. And that we'll hopefully be able to do the interview rounds with a variety of people. It'd be fun to be interviewed on that'd be fun. Forrest certainly up with that's a given, and she's in our network. Um, but Paula Gia interviewed me, and Jackson has been commented on by various ones. Vice Rhino has the book, I know that. Danston Cardinale has the book. PZ Myers, I know, has the book. I don't think he mentions it much, but nevertheless, I know he bought one. The ebook, I think, not the hard copy. And there we go. We're aiming, once I get, I'm currently burrowing to get the page counts down properly. I don't want to lose any of our relevant information or pithy little context. And I definitely don't want to lose the Acts of Philip that we're alluding to in the new book. That's in relation to supposed dragons that were being hunted by medieval things. Oh, God, some of the claptrap that creationists pull off in this area that we want documented so that people can get a good chuckle from now on. Yes. Yeah, that guy probably got mad at the jellyfish. Yeah, they'll be complaining about the datings and all that. There's roughly 2,000 or 3,000 anti-evolutionists in the reference field. They've generated about 11, 12,000 works that I have in my data field. So that's running at like on average 3-4 works per person. So there tends to be a great deal of vomitous repetition. They tend not to be collaborative. You do have some occasional creationist papers that can have half a dozen authors to them, but they're usually lone wolves who are putting out the screeds, or maybe 1 or 2 co-authors on occasion. This is very different from what you find in the scientific community, where the heavy gun papers are collaborative efforts involving dozens and sometimes pages of scientists and teams. So that's why I have upwards of 80 some odd thousand scientists that are the authors of the 36,000 technical papers that are in my tip data field, which can be compared to that tiny sliver, of which there's maybe about 150-ish of the creationist writers who have actually been published in regular science journals, often on fields other than where they're blithering, and sometimes on the fields. Andrew Snelling still kind of publishes every now and then regular science papers. One of the little data fields that creationists put together involved Kurt Wise and Whitmore, I think, and a few others. Was a data field of direction information, tidal flows and stuff from things that they're trying to connect up to the flood. But it was published at one of the nature journals as a scientific data field. When you actually looked at it in detail, as some people have, turns out, no, it doesn't actually support the flood. So their attempt to hope that this was going to rescue the idea that the flood coming in this slosh and then you can see it going out on that slosh. Nope. Only if you cherry pick the data, and cherry picking ain't allowed. So anyway, everybody in the east of the United States or in Europe, where it's hot as Hades, my Lord, there was apparently like 108 degrees in Washington, D.C., 111 in Norfolk, Virginia, and with their humidity, yuck, holy moly. I mean, even a 75-degree day in humidity that you find in the east is enough to drain you. Being in triple digits must be absolutely appalling. So our relatively calm 70s, 80s here in Spokane at the moment, cross fingers, knock wood, will keep us fairly comfortable. And thanks to my niece buying me some repair sweeps for my screen doors to keep the bugs out. We're able to open the front and side doors to let the nice, cool, breezy air come in. And that puts a little bit of alleviation on the cooling pumps that we need to pump the basement air around and all that to keep things fairly comfortable. For some strange reason, my niece and family are concerned that I not boil to death in my bedroom here in Spokane. So, anyway, everybody be super duper safe, careful, watching out about things, and keep your financial powder dry because I am expecting doom coming along the side. And even a lot of these wealthy people in the upper part of the K, of our K shaped economy, could have a lot of their activities cropped if a lot of this AI bubble and some of these other bubbles that are in the unregulated Trumpista economy collapse. Maybe it even might pull down some of the Trumpistas themselves, the Trump family, who are the most blatant, corrupt bunch of scuzz buckets. They've forgotten the rule of the Tweed ring back in the 19th century that if you're going to be a corrupt, grafting, greedy person, you must also make sure to that the widows and orphans in your jurisdiction get taken care of so that they aren't complaining. But the Trumpistas are building their golden palaces and living the high life and buying their big planes and jets and yachts and not making sure that widows and orphans and common folk are getting along well enough. So they're not thinking it through. So everybody stay safe, and we will be checking you out next week when we will have another exciting Luskin week, where once again we discover that those papers on their list are not helping the ID cause on junk DNA. Ending the stream.